June 3rd, 1975. Elvis was singing Burning Love when he suddenly stopped the song. Screams were rising from the audience. In the middle section, two women had attacked each other, and the fight was spinning out of control. When Elvis left the stage and ran between them, 18,000 people held their breath. What happened next unfolded in a way nobody could have predicted. The Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee, was packed to capacity that warm June evening. This was Elvis's hometown, and performing here always carried extra weight, extra emotion, extra significance. The crowd was a mix of longtime fans who'd grown up with Elvis and younger people discovering the king for the first time. The energy was electric, that particular Memphis energy that combined Southern hospitality with rock and roll rebellion. People were dressed in their finest Saturday night clothes, hair done up perfect, ready to see their hometown hero do what he did best. Elvis was about halfway through his set, and he was on fire. At 40 years old, he was dealing with health issues that would plague him for the rest of his life. But on this particular night, none of that seemed to matter. His voice was strong, his movements were sharp, and he was connecting with the audience in that magical way that only Elvis could. He'd already performed CC Rider, I Got a Woman, and Love Me, and the crowd was eating it up, singing along, dancing in their seats, completely lost in the moment. Then he launched into Burning Love, one of his biggest hits from a few years earlier. The driving beat, the passionate vocals, the raw energy of the song had everyone on their feet. Elvis was moving across the stage with that famous hip-swiveling style, his white jumpsuit catching the lights, sweat already starting to show through the fabric. The band was tight, the horns were blaring, and the whole Coliseum was shaking with the collective energy of 18,000 people having the time of their lives. But in section 1114, row M, something very different was happening. Two women, seated just 3 seats apart, were staring at each other with an intensity that had nothing to do with the music. Linda Martinez, 34 years old, a secretary from East Memphis, had been looking forward to this concert for months. She'd bought her ticket the day they went on sale, had planned her outfit weeks in advance, and had arrived at the Coliseum 2 hours early just to soak in the atmosphere. This was supposed to be her night, her escape from the stress and complications of her life, her chance to lose herself in the music she loved. But when she'd taken her seat and looked around at the people near her, she'd frozen. 3 seats to her left, also in row M, sat Patricia Johnson, 32 years old, a nurse from Midtown Memphis. And Linda and Patricia knew each other. They knew each other very, very well. In fact, for 3 years, they'd been the closest of friends, practically sisters, sharing everything from secrets to clothes to dreams about the future. But that friendship had ended 6 months ago, in the most painful, betraying way possible, and they hadn't spoken since. They hadn't even been in the same room since, until now. The reason for their falling out was sitting in the row behind them, completely oblivious to the tension building just feet away from him. James Bradley, 36, a charming car salesman with dark hair and an easy smile, was enjoying the concert, singing along to Elvis, having no idea that he was sitting in the middle of a powder keg that was about to explode. Because James had been dating both women, not openly, not honestly, but secretly, carefully managing to keep them separated, telling each of them that she was the only one, that he was committed, that he saw a future together. For 6 months he'd been juggling 2 relationships, 2 sets of promises, 2 lives, and he'd been doing it so skillfully that neither woman had suspected a thing. Until one day, by pure chance, Linda had been driving through Midtown and had seen James's distinctive red Mustang parked outside an apartment building she didn't recognize. Curious, she'd circled back and parked where she could watch, and she'd waited. And after 20 minutes, she'd seen James come out of the building with a woman she recognized immediately. Patricia, her best friend Patricia. They'd been laughing, holding hands, and James had kissed her before before getting in his car. Linda had sat in her car, shaking, unable to process what she'd just witnessed. Her boyfriend and her best friend together. How long had this been going on? Had Patricia known about her? Had this been happening the whole time? Linda had confronted James that very night, and the truth had come spilling out. Yes, he'd been seeing both of them. Yes, for months. No, he wasn't sorry exactly, because he cared about both of them, and wasn't it better to have shared his love with two wonderful women than to have chosen just one? The narcissistic logic of it, the complete lack of remorse, had made Linda feel sick. She'd ended things immediately, and then she'd called Patricia, expecting solidarity, expecting them to bond over having been betrayed by the same man. But that conversation hadn't gone the way Linda expected. Patricia hadn't been sympathetic. In fact, she'd been defensive, angry even. She'd accused Linda of trying to sabotage her relationship with James. She'd said that James had told her all about Linda, how she'd been clingy and demanding, how he'd tried to end things, but she wouldn't let him go. Patricia actually believed James's lies, believed that she was the real girlfriend, and Linda was some kind of obsessed ex. The phone call had ended with both women screaming at each other, saying things they couldn't take back, and they hadn't spoken since. Now, 6 months later, here they were, 3 seats apart, at an Elvis concert. Linda had seen Patricia the moment she sat down, and her stomach had dropped. Of all the concerts, of all the sections, of all the nights, how could this be happening? She'd considered leaving, but she'd paid good money for this ticket, and why should she be the one to leave? She had just as much right to be here as Patricia did, so she'd stayed, trying to focus on the stage, trying to ignore the woman just a few feet away. Patricia had noticed Linda too, and she'd had the same reaction: shock, anger, a desire to leave mixed with stubborn determination to stay. But there was something else too. Seeing Linda after all these months had brought back a flood of memories, not just of the betrayal, but of the friendship they'd had before it all fell apart. Late-night conversations, shared secrets, inside jokes, the feeling of having someone who truly understood you. Patricia had missed that more than she wanted to admit. But now wasn't the time for nostalgia or reconciliation. This was supposed to be a fun night, and Patricia was determined not to let Linda's presence ruin it. So she'd turned her attention to the stage, to Elvis, trying to lose herself in the performance. For the first half of the concert, they'd successfully ignored each other. They sang along, they clapped, they enjoyed the show, carefully keeping their attention forward, pretending the other didn't exist. But the tension was there, building with every song, every minute they spent in such close proximity without acknowledging each other. And then, during Burning Love, it happened. James Bradley, who'd been sitting behind them completely unaware of their presence, had stood up to get a better view of the stage. As he stood, he'd glanced down, and suddenly, for the first time, he realized who was sitting in front of him. Both of them, Linda and Patricia, his 2 ex-girlfriends, here, together, at the same concert, in the same row. His face had gone white, and in that moment of shock, he'd lost his balance slightly, reaching out to steady himself. His hand had landed on Linda's shoulder. Linda had felt the touch and turned, expecting to tell some overeager fan behind her to watch it. Instead, she found herself looking directly into James Bradley's face. The face she'd been trying to forget for 6 months. The face that still appeared in her dreams, sometimes as a loving boyfriend, sometimes as a lying betrayer. For a frozen second, they just stared at each other. Patricia, hearing Linda's sharp intake of breath, had turned to see what was wrong, and then she saw him too. James, the man she'd been defending for 6 months, the man she'd lost her best friend over, the man who'd sworn to her that Linda was the problem, not him. He was here, right behind them, and from the look on his face, he was just as shocked to see them. Linda, James started to say, but he never got to finish the sentence. You knew, Patricia had suddenly shouted, standing up so fast her seat flipped back. She wasn't talking to James, she was talking to Linda. You knew he'd be here, that's why you came. You're still trying to get between us. Linda had stood up too, indignation flooding through her. Are you insane? I had no idea he'd be here, and there is no us for me me to get between. He was lying to you just like he was lying to me. That's not true, Patricia shot back. He explained everything. You couldn't accept that he chose me over you.
He didn't choose anyone?
Linda's voice was rising now, carrying over the music. He was playing both of us. Are you really that blind? People around them were starting to notice the commotion, turning away from the stage to watch this drama unfolding in the audience. James, caught between them, was trying to edge away, to disappear into the crowd, but there was nowhere to go.
I'm not blind, you're just jealous? Patricia moved closer to Linda, her fists clenched. You never could stand it when someone was happier than you.
Happy? You think you were happy with a man who was lying to you every single day? Linda stepped forward too, and now they were face to face, inches apart. He wasn't lying to me, he was trying to let you down easy, but you couldn't take a hint. Oh my God, you're still defending him. After he's standing right here and we both know the truth is you're pathetic. And that's when Linda shoved Patricia. Not hard, just a push to the shoulder, but it was enough. Patricia stumbled back a step, and something in her snapped. All the anger, all the hurt, all the betrayal she'd been suppressing for 6 months came flooding out, and she launched herself at Linda. They went down in a tangle of limbs, landing hard between the rows of seats. People around them screamed and jumped back. Linda's purse went flying, spilling its contents across the floor. Patricia's carefully styled hair came undone as Linda grabbed a handful of it. They were rolling on the ground, a chaos of scratching nails and shouted accusations. Years of friendship turned to fury in a matter of seconds. The people seated around them were in shock. Some were trying to help, reaching down to pull the women apart, but they were fighting with such intensity that it was dangerous to get too close. Others were calling for security, waving their arms to get someone's attention. A few people shamefully were just watching, treating it like part of the show. And on stage, Elvis had noticed that something was wrong. He couldn't see exactly what was happening, but he could see the commotion, the crowd parting, people standing up and pointing. He could hear the screams that weren't the usual concert screams, but something sharper, more frightened. And he'd done something he rarely did. He stopped singing mid-song. The band, confused, played a few more bars before trailing off into silence. The entire Coliseum was now aware that something was happening. 18,000 people turning their attention from the stage to the disturbance in section 1114. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, shading his eyes against the spotlights, trying to see what was going on. Folks, what's happening out there? His voice boomed through the speakers. Somebody having trouble? Security guards were converging on the area, but the rows were packed tight, and it was hard for them to get through quickly. By now, Linda had a scratch on her cheek that was bleeding, and Patricia's blouse was torn at the shoulder. They'd knocked over drinks, stepped on people's feet, and were creating absolute chaos in what had been moments before a peaceful section of the audience. Elvis made a decision. He turned to his bodyguards and security team standing in the wings. "Clear me a path," he said. "I'm going down there." His team tried to protest. It wasn't safe. It wasn't protocol. He needed to stay on stage. But Elvis was already moving. He stepped down from the stage, and with his security team forming a protective barrier around him, he began making his way through the crowd toward the disturbance. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. Elvis Presley leaving the stage in the middle of a concert, walking through the audience, heading toward a fight. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, people pressing back to make room, everyone wanting to see what the king was going to do. By the time Elvis reached section 114, security had finally managed to pull Linda and Patricia apart, but they were still screaming at each other, still trying to get free to continue the fight. Elvis stepped into the space between them. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, this iconic figure in his white jumpsuit, now standing in the middle of a crowd of of regular people, between two disheveled, angry women who were breathing hard and glaring at each other with pure hatred. The silence that fell over the Coliseum was absolute. 18,000 people watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Elvis looked at Linda, then at Patricia, then at James Bradley, who was trying to disappear into the crowd, but was being held in place by people who'd figured out he was somehow connected to all this. "All right," Elvis said, his voice calm but carrying authority. "What's going on here, ladies?" Neither woman spoke at first. The reality of the situation was hitting them. They'd just been fighting at an Elvis concert, and now Elvis himself was standing right in front of them, asking them to explain themselves. The absurdity and embarrassment of it was overwhelming. Patricia started, pointing at James, but her voice cracked. Linda began, but then she couldn't continue either. Elvis waited patiently. He'd dealt with plenty of drama in his life, plenty of fighting and jealousy and betrayal. He knew this wasn't going to be a simple explanation. Finally, Linda took a shaky breath and said, "He was dating both of us. For months, we were best friends, and he was lying to both of us. And we didn't know until 6 months ago, and we haven't spoken since. And then we ended up at the same concert, and he's here too. And She trailed off, tears starting to flow now that the adrenaline was fading. Elvis turned to Patricia. "That about right." Patricia nodded, unable to meet his eyes. I thought she was lying about him. I chose him over her, and I lost my best friend for a man who wasn't worth it." Elvis looked at James. "You got anything to say for yourself, brother?" James opened his mouth, closed it, then managed, I made mistakes." "That's putting it mildly," Elvis said, but there was no anger in his voice, just a kind of weary understanding. He turned back to the women. "Ladies, can I tell you something? Can we all just calm down for a minute and have a conversation?" Linda and Patricia both nodded, still breathing hard, still processing the fact that Elvis Presley was standing between them, mediating their fight. Elvis gestured to the people around them. "Y'all mind giving us a little space, just for a minute?" The crowd moved back, creating a small circle of privacy in the middle of the packed Coliseum. Elvis's security kept people from pressing in too close, but everyone was still watching, still hanging on every word. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life," Elvis began, speaking to the two women, but loud enough that people around them could hear. "I've hurt people I loved. I've been hurt by people I trusted. I've been the fool, and I've been the one who made someone else feel like a fool. And you know what I've learned? Holding on to anger, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't hurt them near as much as it hurts you." He paused, making sure they were listening. "Now this gentleman here," he gestured to James without looking at him. "He made his choices. He lied to both of you. He betrayed your trust, and that's on him. That's his burden to carry. And trust me, if he's got any conscience at all, he'll be carrying it for a long time. But you two," he looked from Linda to Tadakik, "you were friends, real friends, and you let him destroy that." "But she chose him over me," Linda said, her voice small. "And you believed his lies about her," Elvis countered gently, looking at Patricia. "You both made mistakes. You both said things you can't take back. But here's the question. Which hurts more? What he did to you, or losing each other?" The two women looked at each other for the first time with something other than anger. Really looked at each other, and in that moment they both saw not the enemy, not the rival, but the friend they'd lost. The person who'd known them better than anyone else. The person they'd laughed with, cried with, dreamed with. "I missed you," Linda whispered. "I missed you too," Patricia said, and her voice was thick with tears. "Then maybe," Elvis said softly, "it's time to stop fighting each other and start figuring out if that friendship is worth saving. Because I'll tell you what, life's too short and real friendship is too rare to let some man, no offense, brother," he glanced at James, "come between you." Linda took a tentative step toward Patricia. "I'm sorry I shoved you."
I'm sorry I attacked you, Patricia replied, and I'm sorry I didn't believe you about James. You were right about all of it.
I was so angry at you, Linda admitted, but I was really more angry at myself for not seeing what he was sooner, and for letting a man come between us. They stood there, two former best friends, surrounded by 18,000 people, and the biggest star in the world having one of the most important moments of their lives. Elvis looked at his security team and quietly asked for something. A moment later, one of them handed him two of Elvis's famous scarves, the white silk ones he gave to fans. Elvis took them and handed one to each woman. "I want you both to have these," he said, "but I want you to make me a promise. I want you to promise that you'll sit down, really sit down, and talk to each other. Not today, not while you're still raw from all this, but soon. Promise me you'll try to rebuild what you had, because I'm looking at you both, and I can see that you're hurting worse from losing each other than from anything that man did to you." Linda and Patricia both nodded, clutching their scarves. "And one more thing," Elvis added. "You both just got into a fight at my concert, so I'm gonna need you to make it up to me by sitting through the rest of the show like civilized people. Can you do that?" Despite everything, both women laughed. The tension broke, and Linda reached out and took Patricia's hand. "We can do that," Patricia said. Elvis smiled, that famous Elvis smile that had charmed millions. "Good. Now I'm gonna go back up there and finish my show, and you two are gonna sit down and enjoy it. And him," he turned to James, who'd been watching all this with increasing discomfort, "you're gonna find somewhere else to sit, far away from these ladies. You understand me, brother?" James nodded vigorously. Security escorted him to a different section while Linda and Patricia settled back into their seats, now sitting next to each other instead of 3 seats apart. Elvis made his way back to the stage, and as he walked, the entire Coliseum erupted in applause. Not polite applause, not casual clapping, but a sustained standing ovation that went on for several minutes. People were cheering, crying, overwhelmed by what they'd just witnessed. Elvis hadn't just stopped a fight. He'd facilitated a reconciliation, a healing, right there in front of everyone. When Elvis got back on stage, he picked up his microphone and said, "Well, that was different." The crowd laughed. "Where were we?" "Oh yeah, Burning Love. Let's take it from the top." The band kicked back in, and Elvis launched into the song again with even more energy than before. And in section 11:14, row M, Linda Martinez and Patricia Johnson sat side by side, holding hands, crying and laughing and singing along, their friendship beginning to mend in the most unexpected place imaginable. After the concert ended, Linda and Patricia didn't leave immediately. They stayed in their seats, talking, really talking. For the first time in 6 months, they talked about James, about the betrayal, about the things they'd said to each other in anger. They apologized, explained, forgave. It wasn't a complete healing. That would take time, but it was a start. They exchanged phone numbers even though they both still had each other's memorized. They promised to meet for coffee the next week, and they both agreed that they'd never ever let a man come between them again. The story of what happened that night spread quickly through Memphis. People who'd been at the concert told their friends and family about the fight, about Elvis leaving the stage, about his impromptu counseling session in the middle of 18,000 people. Local news picked it up, and then regional, and eventually it became one of those legendary Elvis stories that gets told and retold over the years. Linda and Patricia did meet for coffee that next week, and the week after that, and slowly, carefully, they rebuilt their friendship. It was different than before. There was a weariness now, a recognition that trust once broken takes time to fully heal. But it was real. They learned to talk about the hard things, to be honest even when honesty was uncomfortable, to value their friendship more than their pride. They both stayed single for a while, focusing on themselves and their renewed friendship. When they eventually did start dating again, they were honest with each other about it, even introducing each other to the men they were seeing, making sure there could never be another James Bradley situation. 5 years later, in 1980, Linda was getting married to a kind accountant named Robert, and standing beside her as her maid of honor, wearing a dress they'd picked out together, was Patricia Johnson. At the reception, they told the story of how they'd almost lost each other, how they'd gotten into a physical fight at an Elvis concert, and how the king himself had helped them find their way back to each other. When Elvis died in August 1977, both women were devastated. They attended a memorial service together in Memphis, holding hands, both carrying the scarves Elvis had given them that night. They spoke to a reporter who was there, sharing their story, wanting people to know that Elvis's legacy wasn't just his music, but his ability to see people's pain and help them heal. "He could have had security throw us out," Linda said. "We were disrupting his concert, making a scene, probably scaring the people around us, but instead he came to us. He took the time to understand what was really happening, and he helped us see that we were destroying something precious over someone who wasn't worth it. He gave us our friendship back," Patricia added, "and I don't think he ever knew how much that meant, how much it still means." The scarves Elvis gave them that night became treasured possessions. Linda had hers framed and hung it in her living room. Patricia kept hers in a special box and would take it out whenever she needed to remember important lessons about friendship, forgiveness, and not letting anger control your actions. In 1995, 20 years after that night at the Mid-South Coliseum, Linda and Patricia returned to Memphis for a special Elvis memorial event. They were invited to speak about their experience, to share the story of the night Elvis mediated their fight. They stood on stage together, still best friends after all those years, and told an audience of Elvis fans about the man they'd met for 5 minutes, but who had changed their lives forever. "People remember Elvis for his music, for his movies, for his style," Linda said that night. "And all of that is important, but what I remember is his compassion, his willingness to step into an uncomfortable situation and help two strangers find their way back to each other. He taught us that anger is a choice," Patricia said, "and forgiveness is a choice. And choosing forgiveness, choosing to repair what's broken instead of throwing it away, that's where real strength comes from." Their story has been used in conflict resolution training, in counseling sessions, in discussions about the power of intervention. It's been cited as an example of celebrity influence used for good, of fame being channeled into genuine human help rather than just attention or profit. But for Linda and Patricia, it's not a teaching story or a case study. It's the night they almost lost everything that mattered and the night they learned what really counts in life. It's the memory of Elvis Presley, sweaty and tired from performing, taking time to see two women not as a disruption to his show, but as human beings in pain who needed help. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important interventions come from the most unexpected places. If this incredible story of conflict, reconciliation, and unexpected intervention moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of forgiveness and real friendship. Let us know in the comments about a time when someone helped you see a situation differently, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments that reveal the best of human nature.